So, Angus, I came to know you through your Rebuilding Macroeconomics program, and for which I was a recipient, and so that was awesome. And so that's a network of a research network, and then in addition, you're a professor of research at UCL, which you'll be talking about, and then your day job is a chief economist, economic advisor at Lloyd's Bank Group. So you're doing a lot. And thank you so much for coming and talking to us about what you're planning at UCL.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David, and everybody. I've got some slides that I'm going to share, which really go through how we've got here and who we are and what we're trying to do. I hope you can all see these. So I'm the director of something called Rebuilding Macroeconomics,
she is supposed to be in,
which is a research network which is transitioning into a research and teaching center. It was originally funded by an Economic and Social Research Council large grant, which is, they're kind of quite rare to get. It was about £3 million. And the title was Understanding the Macroeconomy. And the aim that we set out was to transform macroeconomics back into being a policy relevant social science. I mean, at the time, you'll have remembered after the global financial crisis, all of the comments that macroeconomics doesn't really help us with any of the challenges we face. So we set about funding a lot of research where the sort of criteria were, first of all, that it had policy relevance. And the second thing is, we thought it had to be projects that would not be funded by mainstream funding sources. So we deliberately tried to find things that were sort of slightly off the beaten path. And in the end, we funded 44 research projects, which was about 20 more than we expected. We mostly managed to stretch the budget by negotiating overheads with universities, which are remarkably sort of fat organizations, as far as I can see. And we have on our website over 80 working papers and discussion papers, which have yielded, at the last count, well over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, ranging from the Journal of Political Economy, Econometrica, so the very top economics journals, to Science, so all sorts of different journals. This wasn't our ambition, which is quite interesting. Sometimes when you aim away from the target, you actually end up hitting the target. We really didn't try to get journal publications, so that's been quite a nice consequence. And we've held well over 100 public events. We had one just a few weeks ago about the economics of security, where we had the US administration and NATO taking part, which is really about where do the objectives of defense and economic policy, where do they cross? So that was very interesting. And William Hines, who's on this call, he put that together. And in 2021, we joined the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL. And last year, we taught our first course. And the reason why I went to UCL is because when we set up Rebuilding Macroeconomics, we had a 5-person management group. And because we were so keen to sort of push the interdisciplinary boundaries for an economics group, and I count myself as a pretty standard economist, actually, I decided to have 3 non-economists and 2 economists. So we deliberately biased it away from economics. And Henrietta Moore is the director of the IGP at UCL. She's an anthropologist, and she was one of our advisory group. And so as the grants started to run down, in other words, the research projects were finished, she said, well, why don't you come to IGP? So we've housed ourselves there. And the idea is we're in this transformation back in towards becoming a research and teaching center. And what I hope we'll talk about today, and I get your ideas on, is an MSc, which we're in the process of applying to set up. The MSc would start in October 2026, which is nearly just over 2 years ago, but that's largely due to the marketing and administrative processes at the university. It's actually as fast as we can do it. And so far, I don't want to jinx it, but so far things have gone remarkably smoothly. So we're quite excited about this. I think we will be able to make it happen. So that's who we are. In terms of what we did after the research projects is we tried to look at the common thread running through many of the research papers. Now, bear in mind, there's 44, and they're all different areas. But if there's one thing which ran through a number of them, it's how we respond to uncertainty. And ignoring this issue leads to two problems. One is obviously a difference between predictions and outcomes. But much more importantly, we just don't seem to want to entertain the question of how we do, in fact, seem to respond to uncertainty. Given that this is a feature of the world, and we do deal with uncertainty, we do move forward, we're not stuck in an endless stream of prisoners' dilemmas, we somehow find a way forward. In fact, this could well be our genius, given all that we've managed to create. And so if I was to summarize it, I'd say if orthodox economics is about choice in well-defined situations, rebuilding macro is about choice in ill-defined situations. What do we do when we don't know? Because we clearly do something. And interestingly, I think this takes us back to Adam Smith, but not the Adam Smith most people have in their heads. Adam Smith in the history of astronomy, where he had his theory of inventiveness, of how we make sciences in the first place, and possibly Darwin to solve the coordination problem that I think Smith kind of left hanging there. So that was the common thread about ill-defined situations. If I say there's a big idea without overdoing it, I'd say that, first of all, economies are living and open systems, so they're full of species, biological species, for creating and using knowledge. And, Smith was writing just after Hume, who said that you cannot prove an empirical proposition. So we know that knowledge is always fallible and incomplete. And much of this knowledge can be embedded in our social customs, in our faiths, in our beliefs, but also in our technology that we use to produce goods and services which we exchange. So the growth of technology seems to have a large part of the explanation of the, as Deirdre McCluskey calls it, the great enrichment since the 17th century. And it strikes us that knowledge, building on Smith's history of astronomy, knowledge comes from connecting principles, but because we have cognitive limits, we each have cognitive limits, we do this through interaction and specialization, the division of labor. And the division of labor, as Hayek said, is very close to the division of ideas and knowledge, which gets us to this notion of inventiveness, of how we have this psychological need for disquietude by connecting principles, which is his whole idea of invention. And then when he discussed the idea of the division of labor, everybody thinks this is fairly standard, can be included in a production function. But the third element, he said, was that once you standardize this, we invent machines. He actually talked about inventing machines and how this becomes a peculiar trade for specialization itself, a large part of which sort of gets ignored. So we think there is a theory of invention that really was Smith. But in this specialization, we inevitably create asymmetries of information and much wider coordination problems. And the coordination, Smith sort of left to moral sentiments, but it seems to us and to other writers since then, such as Alfred Marshall, that these coordination problems still haven't really been resolved. And I think this is where we come to cultural evolution, the idea that groups such as firms are means of deepening knowledge rather than ways of minimizing costs. And this comes very much to the levels of functional organization, of which David and Dennis have been writing about. So it's really this combination of inventiveness which leads to coordination problems, and perhaps between economics and biology, we can start making some progress. Whoops. So we came up with the idea of social economics. I'm really not sure this is the right term. It's been used elsewhere. I'm sort of slightly, I'm not especially keen on it. But the idea is that it's an open and generative system. So we create it from the bottom up rather than an aggregation of atomistic units. That the agents themselves, I think agency is a very deep area. We're motivated by self-interest, but also moral sentiments in their own right, rather than a means to an end. And it's through repeated interactions that we have rules and social codes, social groups emerge, which can either promote or stifle knowledge. How purpose can help us meet our challenges, I think, is an important area. And also some of the latest technologies, such as agent-based models and dynamic networks, I think can help us look at interactions which lead to outcomes beyond presupposed equilibria. So that's the sort of framework we're looking at. And our strategy is based on a short summary of principles, sort of similar to the Mont Pelerin Society, where I think the aim is anybody who reads it would find it quite inclusive. And we have 3 legs. One is a research center where we hope to move from working papers to the pro-social journal that David and Dennis and I are trying to establish. The second is a PhD scheme, which we now have up and running at UCL. And the next phase will be MSc students, because we have to have the next generation of ideas and researchers. And finally, engagement with policymakers, which all of us, William works at the World Bank, Dennis runs Global Solution Initiative, and I worked at the Treasury for a long time, and so have quite good connections into UK institutions. So we've got a 3-part strategy. For the MSc, the timetable is this. October 23, we started teaching a course called New Economics of Prosperity. March 24, we started off the PhD scheme. We've just gone through the faculty review and teaching panels for the MSc. In October, I have what I believe is the crunch meeting, the program, what's called PMAP, which is the UCL-wide approval for the MSc. In October 25, we'll introduce our second module, and October 26 is when we'll introduce what we're currently calling Social Economics for Prosperity, which will be the MSc. As with all of these sort of courses, there are a number of stakeholders. We have 3 in particular. First of all, UCL academics. Whatever we propose has to be academically grounded and complementary, not duplicate existing courses. This is quite important because people in other departments are surprisingly territorial, which is probably not that much of a surprise, and say, actually, this overlaps a bit with one of our modules. That's something we have to balance. UCL administrators, it's got to be commercially viable, meaning 20 students in the first year, rising to 30 to 40 students is a steady state per year. And it has to be congruent with the rest of the IGP, but I think that's quite manageable since we work quite closely with them. So we have to balance this amongst stakeholders. We believe there is a demand for such an MSc, one, because the students group Rethinking Economics say that the economics course is still cut off from real-world issues. The real-world challenges that we're facing are just too important to remain obscured and obstructed by methodological disputes. We believe that students are looking for a rigorous and integrated alternative, and one that gives them tools for professional development. They need to know what's going to happen next in their career. It's not enough just to give them our view of the world. And 4, we know that policymakers, such as the UK Treasury, come to us and say, will you teach this course for a shortened version of this course? Because our policy analysts must have a more diverse range of tools in order to assess situations. So they're coming to us saying, we need to have this course. At the moment, the modules, these are the modules that are planned. So New Economics of Prosperity, that's existing. So that covers rational choice as a sort of framework, the existing framework, uncertainty, experimental economics, technology, and productivity. Modeling prosperity, this will be October 25, which I hope William's going to be taking on, which covers basic models that people will need to use in their future careers. Starting off with DSG, we have to know how that works, computable general equilibrium, networks, ABMs, future technology, transfers, and climate models. And then research methods for human and planetary prosperity. I'm hoping Dennis will embark on this, which covers the embedded economy, flexible functional organization, value and values, and the SAGE index. And then complex adaptive systems for prosperity. We're hoping to have an ABM for the UK, but looking at other application of complex systems for policy challenges. So this will be perhaps with external speakers talking about applications to the policy world. And then a final one on finance for social economics. We were asked to add an extra course. Whether we teach this or not, I'm not so sure. But this is really about the social nature of money, stroke public debt, the boundary problems in finance, the functions of finance, and regulation, adaptation, and trust, and how they substitute for each other. And there has to be a dissertation. The risks that we see, first of all, that we fail to convince the university. That's one. Secondly, that we don't attract enough students, that we don't get enough students enrolling. Third, that the material is incompatible with the skills of the IGP students. What does that mean? Well, some of those modeling courses are quite demanding in terms of programming and mathematics. Competition from other departments in UCL. And on the PhD scholarships, we have one fully funded scholarship, but clearly we need to find a way of raising money for more. So they are, I think, the risks that we currently face. And so I thought to kick off the discussion, I'd ask a few questions. So what are we missing in all of this? Where have we gone wrong? And the good news about doing this now is we're still at a place we can sort of correct and make adjustments. So what are we missing? Does the syllabus try to be too vocational, or all things to all men stroke women? And pedagogical issues. I'm not an educationist, so I'd be delighted to hear from people who are about what we're missing here and what we're not seeing. So that's an opening presentation. I'll stop sharing and pass back to David. I'm very happy to have an open discussion. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, that was great. Thank you very much. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of input. And so I don't necessarily want to be first. So who would please raise your virtual hands? Michael, you are you're first to raise your hand.
That's an absolutely fantastic presentation. The work you're doing there looks absolutely spot on. Just a little bit of context. I teach into the Masters of Complex Systems at Sydney University, where we teach agent-based modeling, and I also teach the criticality and nonlinear dynamics unit in that course as well. The thing that we found was that we've been running this program for about 5 or 6 years now, and we have a much smaller catchment area, I imagine, than UCL does in terms of students. But we have not had any problems with generating 40 to 50 students each year into our intro into complex systems. This has been fed from other parts of the university, from business, from faculty of social sciences, and from science. We're in the engineering department. I think you shouldn't be too worried about the technical competency. We've spent a lot of time developing units that balance deep technical issues with ramping students up from really heterogeneous backgrounds into it. And what you're talking about fits exceptionally well with us, and we've been very successful with it. We've been trying to get up to 100 students for a while. Wow. I'm not sure we actually have the local capacity for that, but I imagine UCL, given your catchment, I think you'll be fine.
Michael, thank you very much for the very encouraging. I didn't 100. That blew my mind a bit. Michael, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to send me the syllabus for your program so we can have a look what you do and the references that you have in there. I can link with David and get your email and drop an email so you have mine. But that
yeah, we'll definitely connect you. You know, I'd like to just insert very quickly. If this could be shared, I mean, you talked about competition within UCL, but if we're in the business of creating modules, if we can do that in a way that could be shared very widely among universities, in addition to within a single program, then only good can come from that. So I just wanted to plant that seed as we continue to have this conversation, that that's a great ideal, because this could spring up all over the world. in a formal academic setting or not. You mentioned Rethinking Economics, the student group, which is all about this. I was so happy to hear that they're having an impact in terms of just incentivizing the program. But thanks for letting me butt in. But Graham, I think you're next.
Thank you. Angus, absolutely fantastic. I really appreciated what you shared, and I'm excited to know more. A couple of thoughts I wanted to put in. So first of all, I just love that red thread of how do we respond to uncertainty. That's been at the center of everything I've been doing for well over a decade now. And the bit that I know you're probably aware of, but I wanted to explicitly state it and offer if there's something I can do to support you here. The central question in anything around uncertainty is, what is the dynamics of how that uncertainty, or the change processes, the dynamics over time that uncertainty shows up in? The central question is, are those dynamics ergodic or not ergodic? And if they're not ergodic, we have to use very different approaches to responding to uncertainty versus the ones that we're used to. And that's one of the primary reasons why standard economics is centered in well-defined situations where you don't have to worry about non-ergodic dynamics. The only problem is, as you know, that's a fairy tale for the world we actually live in. Pretty much everything is non-ergodic. In terms of the firm as a solution to the coordination problem, I really love that. That's given me food for thought, and it fits well, the way you articulated it, it fits well with how we've designed the way we incorporate the businesses we build and the way we're incorporated ourselves as a multi-stakeholder fair shares commons, which is designed to solve that coordination problem across all capitals, all stakeholders inside the company, and between all of the companies in an ergodic ecosystem. And I'm intrigued as to what could emerge from research into that coordination problem at all scales, from within a business unit all the way up to the global economy. And that leads then to my last point, which is your three legs. I would really love to see a fourth leg, which is the leg of the practitioner at the coalface, the business entrepreneurs, the businesses, the business leaders. And maybe that will give what the other three legs need. Real life examples in practice makes it easier for policymakers to say that we're following rather than leading. Gives the PhD students something to research that is raw data, and for the research center as well, gives another leg of data coming in. Check.
Great. So that last point, I think, is an excellent point. And we had it had entered the conversation, but it never fully landed. But I think you're exactly right. On the ergodicity, non-ergodicity, I don't intend to sort of counter all the comments because I don't have answers for most things. But just so you know, there was a paper that came out of Rebuilding Macro, written by Jean-Philippe Bouchot and Roger Farmer, that was in the Journal of Political Economy, which showed that even though a system which is ergodic in probabilistic terms in the limit, if you have an overlapping generations model, then over the lifespan of each generation, it appears non-ergodic. So even if it is technically ergodic, it can give the appearance to people who live normal lifetime spans of being non-ergodic. So I'm not even sure that the distinction isn't even slightly weaker. But it's not something, I know this is a very deep philosophical area, so I've always tried to sort of avoid it, thinking this is just a bear pitch. But you're probably quite correct that we need to grasp this rather than dance around it. But thank you very much indeed for your comments, and I totally accept the fourth leg challenge. Oh, and final point on the idea of the firms as coordinating use and so on. So Alfred Marshall, weirdly enough, gave a speech called Ye Machine, where he came out with a neurological model for how people create variation, because we're trying to tie Darwin into Smith, which you can find online, but if you can't find it, I've got a copy of it, which is very interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the early history of economics into this. It's so important, actually. We tend to forget these figures, but a good, close understanding of them, I think, is really important, because there's so much background to this that gets ignored, and people just anyhow. So good scholarship on this is great. Dennis.
I just have one quick question, which I know to be controversial, but this group could shed some light on it, which is how can we specify the integrative framework that pulls all of this together? People have become, I think, quite sick and tired of many different strands that have been pursued by behavioral economics. And I see sort of several different potential integrative frameworks. One is the one that you put before, which is that it's all about knowledge and uncertainty, and knowledge is a response to uncertainty. And there's a coordination problem that can be solved in various ways. To what degree does that overlap with simply extended Darwinism, which doesn't only look at the evolution of knowledge, but it also looks at the evolution of our objectives, beliefs, perceptions, niche construction, the evolution of social and political networks? It's far broader than that, but has certain principles of variation, transmission, selection and transmission. To what degree do you think that is an integrative framework, or are you actually after a different integrative framework? I know we've had conversations about this, so this won't take you completely by surprise, but I thought the group may be interested in contributing as well.
Thank you, Dennis. So that is a much wider question, and Dennis is one of my source of inspiration for all of this. And so I'm not going to, you're quite right in your interpretation of how I look at this, which is starting off from the idea of there is something different about human beings, about our inventiveness, which goes to human agency and what that really means. I'm intrigued by the biologist's idea that we can have joint agency. So Smith called this, sympathy and so on. And I am too ignorant of Darwin to even, especially in this organization, in this group, put my toe in to try to suggest what the descent of man might have had to say about this. So I don't want to be definitive on that question. And I think I'd rather leave that open for other people to make suggestions to.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm so eager to jump in, but I'm going to hold my place. Jonathan. You're muted, Jonathan, I think.
Angus, are you familiar with the 6 well-being economies?
No, I am not.
So there are 6 countries. They are Scotland, Wales, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Canada that have all committed to create something they call a well-being economy. There's actually something called the Well-Being Economy Alliance that supports them. And the key is they now actually right then, if you Google, you can, there it's all online. You can see they.
I do know now. Yes.
Okay, so they make their national economies in alliance with anyway, the bottom line is, I think it'd be great to both study them to see if they're effective. I mean, in a way, one of them, the well-being economy as an idea, as a macro idea that could be very useful. And so number one, it'd be interesting to study how effective are they, and number two, to help train your students to end up working for those economies. So at any rate, I just think having some survey of them and then analysis of their efficacy and maybe advice on how they can be more effective.
Very good. And Jonathan, we spoke in the breakout group, which was great fun. So I look forward to speaking to you further.
That's great. Mark.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Angus. That's great. Three very quick, hopefully, points that I'd like to touch on. One being your living systems point, another being the PhD, and a third being like how we can all be helping. On the living systems point, I would challenge that premise that economics are living systems, and to touch on that very briefly. Clearly, they're made up of individual humans that are living systems, and they operate in an ecosystem that is a living system. But the economy itself is a mechanistic system. And one way to sort of elucidate that a little bit is one of the requirements for something to be an actual living system is autonomy. And we can quite quickly see that in economics, when it comes to autonomy, or you reference agency, the mechanistic economy actually doesn't provide the expression of autonomy in the actors. And so that's just one example I would say, and I'm happy to speak with you more about that. The second point is I'm really interested in how your PhD program is going. And this is in part a bit of a selfish interest because I tried to do my own PhD in this area and just came up against every headwind you could possibly imagine. So intrigued about that. And then thirdly, on the how can we help? I'd love to see or provide any feedback to your master's stuff, and please use this network. Happy to help.
Thank you very much, Mark. So let me deal with the easy question first. The PhD. So in that timeline, the PhD it's a scheme because a program, again at UCL, would take at least a year to get up and running. And we got this up, we called it scheme instead of a program. So it doesn't have to go through the same protocols. And that's been up in place for only 3 months. So we just accepted our first student who will be working with Dennis Snower, who I think Dennis will concur is an outstanding student. She got top grades in the MSc in the economics department at UCL and works in the Turing Institute. And we'll be working with Dennis on his SAGE index. And so we're really just up and running. But I think that, one of the principles we want to try and impose is that we try our very best to get very strong students who can really add something. Rather, we don't want to become like a factory for PhDs. That, of course, is in absolutely no way indicative of anything. It's just the sort of principle we've decided on. We have for, I think it's British subjects, we have a full scholarship, but non-Brits, we don't have any scholarships yet. So I think that's been a bit of a problem. There are ways of doing teaching and complementing people's income that way. But we don't so the scholarship had a closing date, but the PhD itself is a sort of rolling date. So there should be ways of getting on that. And I'm more than happy to share that with you. And in terms of the difficult question of the economy being a mechanistic system, I don't think I agree with you, but that's fine. And if you've written on something on this, then I'd be delighted to read it. That's probably the easiest way. I'm not smart enough to listen and come up with a great idea.
Oh, there's a lot to discuss. I mean, there's a deep philosophical issue there that we can facilitate. And I find myself disagreeing with you, Mark, a little bit myself. I think there's a sense in which, but for that later. Point being, there's a great intellectual discussion point to be had there, and we can facilitate that conversation. So that
would be a great discussion. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Ted.
Yeah, I'd like to basically take up the point that Dennis raised, which was in my mind before he raised it. which is like, what's the framework for coordinating all of this? And to me, when I was going through my university courses, the definitions of life I was taught didn't make sense, like didn't really work for me. And it wasn't until I created a definition of life myself as systems capable of searching the space of the possible for the survivable that the emergence of humanity made sense, because then you can look at the classical biological life forms as using the search mechanism of replication with variation, and the environment providing, well, just by the fact of differential survival, it ends up sorting and selecting those systems so that you end up with systems that do in fact survive. And it's only when you get to our form of life where we have this complex neural network that can have a model of reality, and we as conscious entities inhabit the model rather than reality itself. So we've got all these subconscious systems that simplify down whatever reality actually is to that which we as individuals perceive. But then that gives us a system of being able to search the space of the possible within the model so much faster than replication with variation in the physical realm, that we are in fact a whole new level of life in that sense, and that we have available potentially infinite search algorithms to search the infinitely dimensional space of all possible. So when I look at it that way, and then this whole idea that David has championed so well in the academic realm that I've been working on for 50 years in the non-academic realm of this multi-level selection, where every different group that comes together can be thought of as an agent and will have selection pressures. But then getting down to the fact that, for me, the key problem in the emergence of any level of complexity is maintaining the cooperation that makes that possible. So that's what tends to destroy things. Like competition tends to drive systems to some local minima on the available complexity landscape, whereas cooperation can maintain complexity, maintain diversity, but you always have the cheating problem. So you have to have this evolving ecosystem of cheat detection and mitigation systems. That whole damn thing gets exceedingly complex. Every new level, you have to have this new ecosystem emerging. So yeah, that was, hopefully I contributed something.
Thank you very much.
Laurent, I find myself agreeing with you very much, sir. That I'll be expanding upon that when it's my turn. Laurent.
So the one thing, if I may just say,
yes,
it's interesting that Smith also talked about what he called philosophers, which we wouldn't call philosophers today, where things become so specialized. You then sort of get this cross-pollination between all of these specialisms. People can look across different disciplines. So we had these interdisciplinary workers, but much more around technology. And so I think that, again, the difference in human agency compared to other species may be something which really needs to be explored here.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep. I really think it's very interesting. And so human agency and also technology, which, I find it fascinating that we don't really have an academic discipline about technology, and yet it's delivered so much in terms of, either livelihoods or destroying the environment, however you want to see it. But the purposefulness of which we put together technology to create new technologies really seems to be right part of this whole challenge that we face.
Wow. Okay.
Well,
let's see.
Technology was precisely the question, the point I wanted to add on top of this conversation. But the conversation is so rich that the initial remark I had is outdated after all. But technology, it builds on, it connects to, Graham was mentioning, how do you include corporations? And what I could at least bring or ask, shed some light on is the fact that today technology is used by companies. They all face in insecurities and uncertainties for the future. And the way it's moving is that they are leveraging more and more what they call digital twins, so digital representations of their business. This is precisely my area. I work in Agile, so incremental delivery of value. And when you're incremental, then you can collect a ton of data, make simulations with local models of the system you're trying to model. And that's how, for example, airplane companies are designing their aircraft. They have a local model of the fuselage, and they can simulate vibrations in certain conditions. They have a local model of the air conditioning. They have a local model of tons of things. They are not all connected together, but they have a twin of everything, and they have local models that they can locally optimize. They don't have the overall view. And they also have a synchronized, so back to the integration problem, that provides a means, if you manage to collect all the data, to make a simulation, or at least collect an integrated view of what's happening and extract information and potentially make simulations. And I thought it would be an interesting addition to the model to have this data collection and technology, maybe more data and integration to the framework, so that you can iterate with value, potentially just change completely, pivot, because it's not the right direction. And the way it's going, the way it's proceeding now, it's companies that do cars know very well how to do it. Now they are modeling the whole battery charging journey of customers. So it's becoming more and more complex, and it involves more humans. The same for airplanes. They are all going in direction that are mimicking parts of society from the bottom up, from their technology. I attended to a conference 2 weeks ago, about Hyundai, and they are defining themselves not as a car manufacturer, but as a mobility solution provider. And their vision is to show a city, and it's a smart city with mobility provided by Hyundai in it. So it's obviously a lot of technology. They need to model that. They need to be able to simulate it. So it's going, we're more going top down. But there are solutions that are coming from the ground up.
That's very interesting with regard to the role of businesses in this sort of program. But thank you for that. That's very informative.
Yeah, and I added a link to OS Climate. It's an open source project about the simulation of the planet from an economical point of view. And I already mentioned it last time. So there are many contributors. Maybe there are other frameworks I'm not aware of, but it's a means for people to contribute in an open way to a technological platform that collects data and models to simulate outcomes of decisions.
That general approach is going to apply to any complex system, the weather or a complex social system. And so I think that really is the wave of the future in terms of digital twins and that kind of model, and including the modular aspect of it. So that's really a great comment. Peter, we are at time, folks. So if you have to leave, then of course you go ahead. And I'm glad that we can continue just a few more minutes to and we'll conclude with, actually, Anne, I'm going to let you go before me, and then I'll make a couple of concluding remarks. Okay. Peter.
Very good. Thanks. Let's see. I was involved in the WEAL Economics Alliance, the global and the Canadian organization. So if you're interested, I can follow up, from my perspective on that, but I won't say too much more about that. Thanks for introducing that, Jonathan. It's I think applicable to the next part here. So in terms of the framing, Angus, of the PhD and masters, would you necessarily have the same title and framing of the position of the economic perspective for this? And the reason I would suggest you might do some kind of brand testing and future analysis of the the uptake and the understanding of the meaning of the framing. I mean, I think social economics is broad and generally well understood. Here it may encompass a number of different perspectives. The preprint to nature sustainability that our GAIN, mainly ecological economists, including George Costanza, was on the team. So it's 20 different heterodox and ecological economists that were part of the global assessment for new economics. Just give you an idea of the positioning of the literature right now. This paper has been in and out of a few top-level journals, but is finally, after about 2 years of reviews, it is getting serious reviews in Nature Sustainability, and so it's probably going to get published. But it's outdated to some extent. In the review, we didn't come across a perspective named in the literature. So this is a thorough literature review across all the kind of emerging modes and perspectives and current positions. You could say in terms of academic branding, these would be the schools of economics, the perspectives, which are about 15, the types of approaches, and societal perspectives, we call them, which include like buen vivir, enlivenment, Ubuntu, Comanche, indigenous forms. Those are societal perspectives. And there's room for others, certainly, but this is what we found in the literature review. And so I can send you the paper, but it might just consider these different positions and frames could make a big difference, if not right now, in the future. And so you want to maybe test out the understanding of that position and the name of the program, because that could make a big difference also in terms of its continuity. That is, you don't want to have to change the name of the program 5 years from now if it's going right. So
yeah, you're completely correct. So please, if I could have a copy of that, that'd be great, because I am slightly uncomfortable about I don't feel I've quite got it right, or we've got it right. I shouldn't say we've got it right. But we keep sort of looking at this, but that would be very helpful. So thank you very much, Peter, and you're absolutely right.
Put a link to the preprint in the chat too, if
Right.
you have an available preprint for that. And I did have one other point about the PhD itself. Are you recruiting candidates that are helping you define the program? In a sense, you wouldn't have the courses in place right now, or maybe you do have some of them, but there's another point I put in the chat. We're working with the same issue at Tec de Monterrey, where, the PhD, I think, we can stand it up relatively soon, because we just need the advisors and we need the PhD students to have the right fit to our program. But the master's is going to take, dedication to the courses. It's got to grow. And so the PhD, you're following the same pathway that I'm proposing at Tech, which is that we get the PhD candidates on board. We have a general name for that here, at least that's what I'm proposing. And if you have a more general PhD and have specific master's platforms, you might have more than one master's that could come out of this.
Yeah. Very reasonable. Food for thought. Thank you.
Okay.
And then I'm going to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Just very, very quick. Thank you for your great explanation. I'm not sure I understood all the technical details of it, but your last slide, there's 2 points that I would like to react to. I have a background in education. I have a philosophy of education background, and I work on paradigm shift in education. And what I notice is that you try to shift to a paradigm for economics, I suppose, but while keeping a very traditional pedagogical paradigm in terms of passing on data, passing on knowledge to the younger generation, learning as an individual, mainly individual, putting information in the brain kind of process, rather than as a co-creative humanity learning space. The citizens of the future getting a parliament where they decide what kind of role they want, and then what kind of data help them to get there. So I have worked on that for prototyped and validated a model on that. I'd be happy to share that.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and it spreads really quick among all the students because we get teams of students from different disciplines. So you don't have to, if you have students that have no math background, they can still contribute meaningfully in terms of sense making, cultural input, because we're in the Anthropocene. I mean, it's all co-evolving together. So the more people we get into the learning process, in the mutual learning process, in the co-creating a vision and knowledge process, the richer and the more prepared they will be for whatever complexity is coming. Not because they have the ready answers or the models, but because they position themselves as co-creators of reality. So, but I don't want to go too much into detail here. And then the second point that I would love to stress is that the financial point is really, really crucial. I work with those are my two hats, sustainable higher education, sustainable finance. The current financial system is designed in an extractive way. So even if you have macro models that say we have to be well-being economy, donut economy, on the macro level, we have to get back into the safe operating space of the planet with the well-being for everybody. But as soon as you start translating that we're in overshoot. As soon as you started translating that to the micro level, because of the money system, companies have to grow, or they go bankrupt, or they can't keep up in the market. So, and that is because of the money system. You have to make money. So we have a means-ends reversal, people and planet, or resources to make money, because we measure the value of the economy in the current money system, which is extractive. So that's why I'm also working on the money is an agreement in a community to use something as a way to measure value, keep track of exchange and stuff like that, commitments to future. So we also have to think of money as a social construct if we want to redesign, if we want to really achieve that macro level regenerative economy. It can be done with the current money system at the micro level, at the company level. A company that sells less and less cars, will go bankrupt. And you can sell mobility. We've seen that with light. We'll sell no more lamps, we'll sell light. Well, the result is that there's light in everything, from my toothbrush to every. So those are the well-known rebound effects, etc., because we have to grow. So I would really encourage you to also look into the money system.
Okay.
How we.
First of all, we haven't met, but I'm very pleased that you're on the call, because I heard you speaking to Mike Krishna very lucidly about issues around his course. And so I think you're completely correct on the co-creation side. And funnily enough, I was just thinking when you said it, first of all, how guilty I am. But also, in the module I taught the end of last year, it was fascinating because they divided the group into two, and they had to come up with an agent-based model to find something interesting. And one of them created an ABM to replicate Ostrom's rules for multi-level systems, which was absolutely
Core design
fantastic.
principle.
The core design, thank you. I was trying to work out what the initials stand for, the core design principles. And it was a group of very diverse people. So one or two of the kids were clearly programmers through and through, and others were much more interested in these broader principles. And so between them, they created something which was way beyond my expectations, absolutely fantastic. So you completely agree. On the second one about money, one of the interesting, so we produced this, look, we do. There's one of the working papers is about what is money, and it comes to the answer that money is social equity. It's more like equity in the system than a liability. And that was written by the Bank of England, and the IMF asked us to present 2 seminars and 2 different time zones for, I think we had about 120 finance ministries around the world tuning in on this, about why this is not really a liability. And And it is a fascinating area when one starts digging down into it. Of course, some firms will go bankrupt because another product's beaten their product, and that's the nature of the system. However, what really is money in this day and age is, I think, something we haven't, well, I think we might have got the answer, but it certainly hasn't been socialized and well understood. It's a long, long way away from there. So I think they're important issues.
Just one
course,
quick last.
course, please,
I
yeah.
think we need to deeply reflect on why we measure the performance or the success of our economy in money terms, because that has led to a means end reversal. We treat the planet and people as resources to make money, and we have a completely financialized economy. I just read an article, an interview today. You buy Lego blocks. Don't let your kid play with it because the value of the Lego blocks will stay higher. I mean, that's how crazy money is really a virtual thing. You know, we buy wine, we buy diamonds, you know, we buy all kinds of things that speculative.
Okay.
It's, you know, speculative. So and that has been the economy, you know, because it's financialized the economy. So think about what money should be. It should be a means to facilitate transactions, whether that is as a future promise, an IOU, a liability, a store of value. That is the how. But the thing is, the function is to learn to live again. We're overshooting the planetary boundaries. So we have to come back into planetary boundaries with the current money system. We've tried it with circular economy. We've tried it so much. You get all the rebound effects. Roland Geyer has done a lot of research on that. It can't work with the current money system. So communities like Elinor Ostrom can say, given the current money system and given the goals that we have for the community, how will we govern the circulation of money in our community? And 2 weeks ago, I attended a conference with people from all over the world. It's called Collaborative Finance. They're really trying to figure it out. It's very complicated. There's also big tech nerd kind of, you know, blockchain kind of, very, very complicated. But I'm just saying people are looking for that because they know that with the current money system, we're not going to get there.
Let me wrap up very quickly with three quick points. First of all, I mean, this particular group, this New Paradigm Coalition, is very, very young, but I'm so proud of what it's accomplishing through meetings such as this. And so I think I'm so happy this has been such a generative meeting, the people it's gotten together and so on, and so forth. So that's point one. Point two is that on the theoretical foundation, and this I'm now continuing Dennis's point, I think my answer to that is that there's two foundational bodies of knowledge. One is complex system science, the other is evolutionary science. Their integration is still a work in progress, and of the two, evolutionary science is by far the least well known. And of course, this coalition is designed to create appropriate balance between the two. I think when I glance at your program, Angus, I see a bit of a deficiency in the evolution part, which I'm more than happy to work on. No surprise for you and so on. But I think that when we talk about the rock solid theoretical foundation, uncertainty plays a big role in it, but that's not general enough. What is sufficiently general is this combination of complex system science applying to all complex systems, living and non-living, and then what's specific about living complex systems. And it's here where Ted's comments come in terms of what constitutes a living system, the three human living systems being so different than non-human living systems and all of that. And then my final point, I think, is that when we talk about such things as master's and PhD programs and this whole academic infrastructure, of course that's needed, but in many ways that's life in the slow lane. And I'm reminded of the Vienna Circle in Vienna between the two wars, where the action was taking place not at the universities but in the coffee houses. It was so much more fluid, and I think the modern version of the coffee house is what's taking place right now. And what I would love to see taking place at universities is not just, and cities and all middle-level units, is not just formal programs like this, yes, those too, but also the fractal version of this. And so I would think that at any university, basically people could just get together and do a fractal version of this, and of course be connected to this. That would be the kind of differentiation that we don't need to wait. We don't need to wait, and that gets us back to the creation of modules that that can be shared. Just think of them as little plasmids, little cultural plasmids that that with horizontal gene transfer and things like that. So so much energy here that and so this is the fast lane. And so along with other things that you've done, your program in macroeconomics, I think. So I think this coalescing is taking place. Historians will look back and see that it's taking place quite fast. That's what they'll say. But for us, it's slow and can be accelerated. And so the idea of catalysis, cultural catalysis, we can do in years what might otherwise require decades or not take place at all, is all part of what my vision of all of this, and what I'm pleased to be contributing to with this particular group. So with that, I think let's put this one in the can, as we say. And actually, the next person on board is Fernanda Ibarra, who is much into what you were talking about, Anne. And so I think we're going to get actually the next event will be very much along the lines that you are that you have brought to this conversation. So that's awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.